Are you a lead developer? Would you like to bring mobile development in-house? areyouadev provides you and your team with everything needed to prototype, code, and support a mobile product in-house. Deliver your first mobile app and upskill your in-house team within 3 months. The areyouadev program includes 3 hours of bespoke video content tailored to your project, over 18 hours of mobile product video material, weekly live Q&A and email support with SLA response times for those annoying bugs. Visit areyouadev.com, that's areyouadev.com to schedule a one-to-one demo of our business team program. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast. The only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor, and this is episode 59, IoT and .NET Core with Pete Gallagher. In this episode, I spoke with Pete about his adventures in IoT, both with and without .NET. We talked about IoT cows, kettles, washing machines, stamp dispensers, and even Astro Pi. This was a wonderful episode to record, and I really hope that it'll be as much fun to listen to as it was to make. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let this show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, Pete, is thank you ever so much for spending part of your Friday evening talking IoT, because, you know, everybody wants their Friday evenings for chilling out, and you decided to spend a little time talking to me about IoT and .NET Core. So thank you ever so much for that.
No worries at all. Always happy to talk about IoT.
Excellent. So for the listeners who may not know so much about you, I was wondering, could you give us a bit of a brief overview of some of the stuff that you do? And I mean, the people who are listening now know that you do a lot of IoT, but is that all that you do? Is Pete just the IoT man and nothing else? You're not a 2D character? Come on, tell us all about it.
I'm a freelance software engineer. I've been doing it for years and years and years now. Before that, I was working for a company that made change machines and kiosks and vending machines and stuff like that. So it was embedded software. So it's always been embedded software. I've always been interested in that. And then I was made redundant from there and started out on my own. And I still consult for that same company in a different guise now. But I also do anything else that people will pay me to do, you know, almost as far as dancing in the rain. If they'll pay me to do it, I'm happy to do that. But no, in all seriousness, I work for companies that do the change machine stuff all the way through to WordPress websites for little guys who make paintballs and stuff like that. So it's quite a broad list of things that I'll do for money.
Yeah. So quite literally the whole stack, right? From the silicone right up to the screen. I like it.
Yeah, I am that unicorn with all them horns, only I'm not covered in rainbows. I'm just covered in everybody's work.
Excellent. I have been told that the true unicorn in development is a developer with design knowledge. I don't know how true that is. My friend James is one of those. He's come from the design background and jumped into development, but he loves to refer to the work that we do as pretend programming because it's C#, right? It's not really programming.
Yeah, unless you're doing CSS all day, then you're not doing anything hard.
Exactly, right. I agree with you completely. Okay. So I've seen that you run like 12 billion user groups. What's that all about? How do you get into that? And how many groups do you run? And can you give us a brief overview of the groups?
Yeah, I think it worked out that I run 8% of Nottingham's, or at least I'm involved in, let's not boast, 8% of Nottingham's meetup groups, but there's a whole heap of meetup groups in Nottingham, some really awesome meetup groups there, so I'm lucky to be involved in that. I run Knots IoT is my meetup group, so that's the only one I run all on my own and don't get any help for. But I do get help from the sponsorship. Rebel helped me with that, Misha. Bell at Rebel specifically is invaluable, and I couldn't do it without her. So they're fab for that. But I also co-organise .NET Knots and Knots Dev Workshop. And then here in Loughborough, I'm on the board of another group called Lati. So, yeah, I like to keep myself busy speaking to people.
That's really cool. What's really interesting in that aspect is that a few of us actually went down to the two most recent Hack 24s. Now that's really old news, right? Because they haven't been able to do them for a while, but they take place in Nottingham as well. And we actually won a whole bunch of prizes at the last one. I think it was 2018. But, yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
it's Andrew and Emma Seaward run. They used to run those. I'm hoping they're going to bring that back, but I never actually managed to make it to it because my youngest daughter, it was her birthday that same weekend.
Oh no!
And it's always that same weekend every year. So
there's a bit of a pattern forming, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So sadly, I never made it to that, but maybe when they bring it back, it'll be a different date, and I'll be able to go.
There'll be other hackathons that you can win out, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the one in Lincoln Hack is fantastic, and I've done that a couple of times now, and I won my first ever Lincoln Hack, which we'll talk about, I guess, in a bit.
Yeah, I had found that. So we the first year we went to Hack 24, and the guys that I went with keep telling me you're not bitter at all. We stayed up for literally the whole 24 hours, heads down at the terminal. Each one of us built a separate part of this pipeline, and we went from nothing to an enterprise level app in 24 hours. And the bloke who won it had written a spreadsheet.
Oh, you're kidding me. Really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's not his fault for winning. That's his fault for being chosen to win. Bad judging.
Yeah, it's his fault for being more effective with his time.
Well, yeah, true. Although, it just depends on what he managed to make that spreadsheet do, of course. If he managed to make that spreadsheet do something pretty cool, then he probably deserved to win, to spend that much time in Excel.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This was measuring employee sentiment via commit messages. So
really?
Yeah, so
okay.
Very, very, very clever guy. But yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't win. We had a system that used Git hooks, and you would commit and type something really horrible into your commit message, and it would go through the Azure Cognitive Services, assign it a score, show it on a dashboard, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we didn't win because it was way too over-engineered.
But that's the whole point of a hack, though, isn't it? What else are you going to do with the other 12 hours?
Well, yeah, that's true. But then the next time we won, we went and we won with one of the apps was just a HTML page with, map and some pointers on it, because it was more a case of what the app could do rather than what it did. So actually, don't tell the judges that, right?
No. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think they can take it back. So it's all good.
Good. So, so yeah, let's talk about, because you're recently an MVP as well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And Pluralsight author as well. So again, congratulations on that. That's a very exclusive club. Both of those are very exclusive clubs to get into. So congratulations for both of those. And you write a whole bunch.
I mainly do that so I don't forget, because my memory is really bad. So if I don't write it down within, moments, it's just gone. So I figure, I can help somebody else at the same time. Then that's just a bonus. But
yeah, I do something similar in that as soon as I figure out some problem that's taken a few hours, is I'll try and write it in a generic way and just post it somewhere on the internet. If it's a Git, like a markdown file in Git or a blog post or something, because invariably 2 weeks time, when I am a different person, I'm going to need to solve that same problem again, right?
Yep. I have solved my own. Past me has helped me with a problem when I've forgotten I've even written that particular blog post, and I've typed it in and it's come up as the answer is now I remember. Thanks, past me.
Yeah, right. It's genius when that happens. It is. So, like IoT, it's a huge field, right? It's embedded systems that are connected to the network.
Well, yeah. That's the broadest term. I mean, Wikipedia have got very similar. It's devices that can talk to each other in the cloud is the way that I'd go that way. Anything from, wearables and Nest and Philips Hue and all of those sorts of things. But I like the cool stuff. I like connected cows and stuff like that, that's the really fun stuff. That's yeah. So they one of the things I talk about in one of my talks is this particular topic, and they managed to figure out that instead of sitting watching cows to find out when they're on heat, when they're ready to have new cows made, normally they just have to sit there and watch them, and the cows are more active when they're on heat. So they strapped a wearable to the cow, and they measured its steps, basically a pedometer, to the cow. And then they fed all that information up through machine learning algorithms, and instead of like guessing when a cow's on heat and getting it right about 50% of the time, they get it right about 19% of the time, and don't have to sit and watch and go to bed sitting watching cows, because they go in heat at night as well, which is the last thing you want if you're a farmer, is you've probably been out all day farming, and the last thing you want to do is sit around watching cows all night. It's just not good for you. So
you see, I did laugh because I had this thought of a cow wearing a Fitbit, but the idea of just, there is this problem and we can solve it, so why not go solve it? I love it.
Yeah. What's dead cool about it is that they because they can pinpoint the time when the cow is in heat and the optimum time, then using the data to figure out when the best time to artificially inseminate it is, because they don't put a bull in a field anymore with a cow. They've got scientific methods, but they realised that if they inseminate either side of this perfect time, you can pick and choose whether you get a boy or a girl cow. It's really...
Wow.
Just by looking at it, it's probabilities, but the probabilities would say if it was earlier, it would be, I think, a boy, and if it was later, it would be a girl. So if you're running low on any one, you can just pick and choose when you inseminate. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
You see, I laughed, but that is really, really cool.
The power of big data, yeah?
Yeah, right? Using IoT to have a boy cow or a girl cow. That's mad. We've talked about Raspberry Pi and .NET Core in the past on this show, but you've been working not just with Raspberry Pi, but with like bare breadboards. And you said earlier on you've worked in embedded systems and stuff. So I was wondering, can you talk through some of the projects that you've done in the past? Give us an idea of some of the stuff that you've built in previous projects?
Previous versions of me.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier I worked for a company that made change machines. And so that was all embedded microcontrollers, microchip embedded microcontrollers, actually. And all of that was written in assembler as well. So my background really in programming, other than the ZX Spectrum, before that was writing assembly. And it wasn't until I found VB6 and stuff like that I got back into higher level stuff. But one of the first projects that I took over, I didn't begin the project, but I took over from the guy that I replaced, was an internet-connected Royal Mail stamp vending machine, which is a big, long title. But we had a fleet of these stamp vending machines out in the wild, and these were just normal stamp vending machines, apart from that they had a modem inside them, and we could dial into them and pick up all the audit trail and event logs and that sort of information. But I mean, you're talking the late 90s here, so this is really before there was a proper internet. It was around, obviously, but this is before traditional IoT anyway. So that was a really cool project, and trying to cram, because it's quite small, memory limited processors these are, trying to be able to cram all of that operating system essentially into a tiny little processor and get that to work it was interesting to be part of that. And then obviously we did many other things after that. We were involved in the card vendors that you used to get when you used to go to hospital. There was a company called Patient Line that used to make cards, dispense cards for the bedside TVs. And they were similar. They had modems inside them, and you could dial in and grab the stats and stuff like that. So, yeah, which kind of, I mean, that's why I like the lower level stuff. I like the fun stuff rather than sort of just the easy stuff. But I mean, it's all good. But I mean, that makes me me sort of mess around with stuff like Arduino as well, which I like. You mentioned as an alternative to Raspberry Pi, which is a full-on computer. I like the Arduino for the lower level. It gets me closer to the metal and makes me feel a bit more at home, I guess, in some ways.
I do remember back at college when I was about 16, 17, they gave us these PIC chips, PIC, PIC chips.
That's the exact ones. Yep.
There you go, right? And they said, look, here's the thing, make a thing. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, right, make it pretend that it's a washing machine. And I'm like, this thing's the size of a credit card. This can't be a washing machine. What are you talking about? And now I have well, okay, we'll talk about Raspberry Pi again, but I have a Raspberry Pi the size of a credit card that sits under my TV with hundreds of gigabytes of movies attached to it on a USB drive. And that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a Pi Zero that's sitting in the kitchen ready to be wired up again because I dismantled it. That is, when it's fixed, it's going to be almost like a jukebox in the kitchen. And I've got a small app that I've written for my phone. As long as I'm on the home network, I can say, okay, play that song, and it will start playing in the kitchen, which is...
I like it.
Yeah, right. Just silly little things that I'm sort of playing around with. That I haven't written any of the software for it. I've written the app, but I haven't written any of the software for it. That's pre-packaged.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the most part, we're using other people's code for half our lives anyway, aren't we? That's what Stack Overflow was invented for.
I do remember around that same time when I was at college, one of my lecturers had said, the thing to remember about programming is it's like Lego. You get all of these pre-compiled bits and just glue them together. And this was like back in 2002. So he was very prophetic is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, we're all OEM builders. We're just copying and pasting the bits in.
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
good.
Right?
I was surprised. I thought you were going to say you were going to use it as a Pi hole, actually, because it seems to be taking off again now. People are a little bit worried about. Certainly, it works for the IoT space as well. People are worried about plugging in Alexas and all of the smart fridges and crazy stuff like that into the home network. Because, I think there was a scare. Well, not even a scare, but people were buying internet-connected kettles of all things, and they were coming with Bitcoin miners built into them. Some nefarious company had built in somehow. So, it's funny. Never mind, obviously, the other problems with internet-connected CCTV cameras and stuff. It's just scary. But
Yes, it is. You've reminded me there of two IoT stories, and that was one was the internet-connected kettle that I think it took the guy 47 hours to get it to actually boil because there were problems getting it connected to his network. And then once it was on the network, he needed to sync it with his phone. And he ended up having to call the manufacturer and say, look, it's not working. They sent him a bug fix on a USB. And it was amazing. And the other one was there was an internet connected washing machine, but it had an FTP server on it that was exposed out to the manufacturer. But because it was an FTP server, it could use Nmap to figure out what else was on your network, and they could jump into your network through the FTP server. So it's like
that's a nightmare.
But I do have a Pi hole set up. So
good on you. The other one of those on the kettle idea, Ember make an IoT mug, and there's people posting that you buy the mug. And then you've got to accept the terms and conditions, and then you've got to do a firmware update before you can drink your coffee. Just buy a normal mug, for heaven's sake. What is apparently it's so that you can keep your mug at exactly the right temperature for coffee. And I think I'm not a massive coffee drinker. I prefer beer. Maybe if you had an internet connected beer glass that would keep my beer at exactly the right temperature, that might work. But I'd get too thirsty. I don't think I'd sit there and wait for it to update. Not if it's anything like your Xbox.
Well, this is the thing, right? Let's say you get an internet connected kettle. You still have to go to the kettle, take it to the tap, and fill it up. Right? What do you do? Put it back down on the cradle, walk into the other room, and then switch it on?
Oh, I know. And we laugh, though, but the first IoT device was a toaster, funnily enough. And I can't remember the guy's name now, but he created it, I think, a year after Tim Berners-Lee created the internet, but the year before the first public-facing website appeared. So the IoT actually predates the web.
Oh, wow.
Which is just crazy to think of that. So he'd wired it up so that you'd still have to put the toast in, and put it down, but it would turn the power on to the toaster through a rudimentary internet protocol. And then the next year, his boss dared him to actually make it go down, and he did it. But it kind of spoilt it by that point, and everybody was bored. But
and then we get Talkie Toaster from Red Dwarf, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, would you like a bagel?
Oh dear. We're having loads of fun talking IoT. I saw that there was a tiny Enigma machine that you worked on as well.
Yeah, that was loads of fun. That came out of we watched a TV program with my eldest daughter about encryption and specifically about how easy it is just to do like letter substitution ciphers and stuff like that. And not long after that, we all went down to Bletchley Park and had a wander around there. Now, Isla, my eldest, she was 5 maybe when we did that. And she was a nightmare while we were down there, to be honest. But when we came back, we were talking about how easy it is to like send secret messages. And she was really excited about that. And she'd not been writing long, of course, at that point, but she knew the alphabet. So I drew the alphabet out and then just mixed the characters up underneath for her, and then wrote out a message and showed her how to make that into a real message and back into an encrypted message. And she was fascinated with that. And it was around that same sort of time that I was playing with the microbit as well, which is fantastic little board, BBC made board, which is sort of aimed at kids and young adults to try and get them into STEM subjects. Similar sort of idea to the Raspberry Pi, but it's a microcontroller based thing. So I thought, I wonder what I can actually make this microbit do. And the microbit, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's like a little square with some LEDs and a couple of buttons and a gyroscope. And it's got a set of breakout pins on the bottom, but you only get, I don't know, about 10 I/O pins. But I thought, how am I going to possibly wire up a full, alphabet of keys to this thing? So I used Microsoft Make Code, and you can make add-ons, extensions for Make Code, and you can, out of the bottom of the microbit is serial ports, an SPI port, and I created I plugged in an IO expander into that and wired it up, and then created an extension to talk to it. Actually, 2 IO expanders, and then all of the buttons. And this was an idea in my head, and then I showed my daughter it and showed her how you could press the buttons and get the letters to come up, and A, B, and C, and then I showed her how easy it was to pick a wire up and swap it with another wire and press that same button, and now it's a C. And then that sort of gave me the platform to be able to tell her a little bit about how a real Enigma machine worked. And it was also led by one of our friends, Anya, who works down at Coventry Transport Museum, and they've got like a young STEM lab down there that she runs, and they were having a World War II day, and she wanted somebody to take down to that. She didn't end up taking it, actually, but I promised her that I'd get it to a point where she could, and I think probably next year now, because I doubt anything like that's happening this year. We'll get it a bit further and see what we can do with that. But that was really fun, just to, not only for my own personal benefit, to be able to learn how to get the microbit to do stuff that most people aren't doing with it, but to sort of get my daughter a little bit more STEM wise. It's good.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I do, if it's at all possible, I would love to see a comparison photo of a real Enigma encoder and this microbit with a little keyboard. Just to see.
Yeah. But actually, size, it wouldn't be, well, if you got it done properly, it'd be a similar size, I guess, but you'd have to put emojis of like a serious face on the Enigma machine and just something laughing. Or maybe just that Picard thing where he puts his hand on his forehead.
Yeah, right? Why not? Oh my goodness. That's amazing. I do remember I went to Bletchley Park as well, and I remember I stood in front of the bomb and was I did not move, and I was just like the whole time, just watching Alan Turing's machine just tick away. Genius.
It was incredible, absolutely, and that the film as well. The what was that film called with Cumberbatch in it? Game. Yeah, that's so good. One of my favourite films. It was such an experience. I need to go back there because a lot of it was spoiled by my daughter. Same one screaming in my face because she was bored of me doing exactly what you did and just standing there looking. I mean, they don't like that, do the children standing around doing nothing, apparently. But I wanted to absorb everything and go and look at everything, and you can't do that with a 5-year-old. It's not practical.
No, that's true.
So yeah, I need to go back, just me and my wife. Or I think actually there's a good chance that there's going to be a Microsoft trip down there at some point. So whether it'll go to Bletchley Park or to the Computer Museum, I'm not sure. But I didn't even get to go to the Computer Museum either, so I was gutted.
It's definitely a multiple day thing, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been to the Computer Museum, but I really want to. I can see here that you've done a privacy camera using Python and Azure Cognitive Services as well.
Yeah, that goes back to the Lincoln hack. So that was my first ever hack a couple of years back. Rob persuaded me to go to Lincoln Hack, and I'm really glad I did because it's such a great experience. That hack is awesome. I know you've been to Hack 24, and I've not been, so I can't give you a direct comparison. But I mean, I think the Tech Nottingham, the Hack 24 one, is like uber organised, and they do an absolutely fantastic job of that. And the Lincoln Hack just seems really friendly and down to earth, and everybody gets involved. And of course, I'd never been to one before, so I didn't know what I was doing. So I went along with a plastic crate full of stuff. I just brought everything. So I had no idea what I was going to do. And you get there and they give you exactly the same as Hack 24, I guess. They give you all of the different categories, and they're always really broad, so you can fit pretty much anything into it. But oh man, I can't even remember the name of the company, but it was Scholar Pack, I think, actually, the company who they just wanted something that would make teachers' jobs easier. And my daughter had been at school for a year at that point, I think a year or two, and we'd go through these learning journey books, and there'd be photos in there, and there'd be like just Isla and then backs of other children or the sides of other children. And we spoke to the teacher about like the photos, and they said, oh, that's a real pain point because they have to be really careful about exposing other children in photos of just one child, because then you could possibly take that learning journey home and safety and stuff. And it makes perfect sense. So I thought, well, I've got a Raspberry Pi here and a camera, and I know how to do Azure Cognitive Services. So I'll make a camera that allows you to take a photo and automatically blur everyone but one child in the photo out, and then create a series of images with just one child's face visible. And so I was one of the annoying people. I got most of that done on the first day, and I probably left about, I don't know, 9:30, 10, and went to bed and got back about 10 a.m. the next day and just finished it in the 2 hours that were remaining. But while I was doing that, even, I was next to a really cool web design company called Epic Media. And they were making the coolest zombie destroying building that I'd ever seen. They made such a lot of effort. Oh, it's fantastic. But they even had an Alexa, and I helped them get that set up so that they could ask Alexa how many zombies were outside, and it would tell them how many zombies. That was really cool. So I even managed to help them do that as well as finish mine off. And then I won. And I won a whole heap of really expensive board games, and I was over the moon. And I saw one of the judges last year after Jess White's DDD, and she says, have you made that thing and sold it yet? Because you need to. It's fantastic. And I still haven't. Mainly because it uses Azure Cognitive Services. And I love Azure Cognitive Services, but it relies then on an internet connection for your camera the whole time. And it's just going to zap any battery that you try and attach to it. So this year's Lincoln Hack, I sat down and I joined the team with Epic because I'd had such a good time with them last year, and we built on their zombie idea by having a zombie bunker that had a camera on the front of it, and it would use OpenCV to check for zombies, and it would tell the difference between Bill Gates and a zombie, and it would open the door for Bill Gates and not for a zombie. I don't know what would happen if Bill Gates would have turned into a zombie, mind you, but it had an air quality sensor in there as well. and I'd hooked up an IoT Central dashboard to it, and it was overboard, and we didn't win, disappointingly, because I think it was fantastic, but it would work all offline because of OpenCV, and I had really good fun with that. And that was a video feed; it wasn't taking photos; it was just live, taking the video and tracking faces and doing recognition in there. So that, though, I did get about 2 hours sleep. So it seems as though the more effort you put into these things, the less likelihood of you actually winning it are.
Yep. I would echo that sentiment. I think at Hack 24 2, the second one that we turned up to, and we won a whole bunch of prizes, you have to make the thing, and then you have to make a video explaining what the thing does, because they don't have time to try everyone's piece of software. But you've got to make your video in like 2 minutes or less. It has to be 2 minutes or less in length. And we spent more time making the video we did making the software.
And that was it. That was the key, you see.
Exactly.
You had a really good idea and nailed it in a couple of hours, and then 12 hours making a video. I like
That's it. That's almost exactly what we did. We played a lot of Super Hot on the VR, had a load of sleep, and then made a video.
Yeah, that game is apt, the name of that game, because you are boiling hot playing that game. It is hard to stay still and play that game. It's a good game, actually. Yeah.
It really is. One of the things that I'm interested in with IoT is the DevOps and containerization side of it, because a lot of people talk about like DevOps, and I could do the Netflix thing. I've talked to someone earlier on today about Netflix, and I said, don't do, because I'm kind of a consultancy type person as well. I'm like, don't aim for Netflix, because you're not Netflix. You're a startup, right? When you've got 1 million customers and 10,000 servers, then aim for Netflix, right?
Yeah.
But until then,
somebody's paying you at that point to do that work. Don't do the work that no one's paying you to do.
Make it stable first, right? But my thing, right? So my thing is with containerization, with DevOps, with Azure, AWS, whatever your cloud provider is, I can push a button and spin up another thing, right? But I can't push a button and spin up another IoT board. So how does DevOps and IoT fit together? Is that just like how does that work?
Yeah, it's something that not a lot of people speak about, funnily enough, but it's a requirement, actually, if you want to do it properly. I think, funnily enough, IoT is still in its infancy for the most part, and people are playing and prototyping still, and a lot of it's small scale. But people like Microsoft specifically have really thought about this whole process, and things like... and it's not pure DevOps, but Azure's IoT Edge service there is fantastic. And that's a containerized system. So that runs on whatever device you want. And Raspberry Pi tends to be the one that I'll look at most. But you have a runtime that runs on the Raspberry Pi, and that's constantly looking at a container registry in Azure for updates to a module. They call them modules, but they're essentially containers, and they are Docker containers. It's a Docker version of Docker that they're running on there. And so, you can code a module on your PC here and then push it out. If you're just prototyping, you just right click on it and tell it to publish it out, and it'll go into a container registry, and you can tell that device that it needs to have that module, and the runtime on the device will say, all right, well, I know what I'm doing. This is going through something called Azure's IoT Hub, which is like a big switchboard in Azure for devices. You can have millions of devices connected to this. So it has a version of the IoT Hub running on the device itself, and then that's talking to a real IoT Hub in Azure. And those two things coordinate together. But I mean, that in itself doesn't give you DevOps, because you're still pushing a button on, you've written the code, you're pushing a button in code or Visual Studio. That's not it. So you can integrate all of this platform into Azure DevOps, Azure pipelines, if you like. And so you can have it build, your whole CI/CD pipeline. You just check the code in, and it does all of that building and creating of a deployment manifest, and then pushing it out to devices, either one at a time or at scale. So it can do that. But you kind of highlighted the fact that you can't just spin an IoT board up, and that's one of the issues. Certainly, if you're talking about Raspberry Pi, because that's ARM32 for the Raspbian operating system, and they don't offer ARM as a build agent in DevOps. Or at least not ARM32. I think there's an ARM64 one, funnily enough, but that's no good either, although I think there might be an Ubuntu 64 for the Raspberry Pi that's just come out recently. But aside from that, what you have to do is use, in this particular model, you have to use your own self-hosted build agent, and you have that on a real Raspberry Pi. And so part of that DevOps pipeline ships off the bits down to the Pi, and it builds that container on the hardware in the right format and sends that back to the pipeline, and then that gets bundled together and sent down. And that works really well, actually. There are other ways of doing that, though. I've not figured out how to do this in Azure, but the open source equivalent of this with Jenkins, you can containerize with something called QEMU, a 32-bit ARM processor. So it's essentially an emulated 32-bit ARM processor, and you run Jenkins on a virtual machine, and you have Docker running on that virtual machine with a QEMU image, and then you ship down into that to build, and you're doing it with Docker, not Azure IoT Edge at this point. You create a Docker image in a Docker image and then feed that back into the pipeline. It's very Inception. But that works really well. And all of that, other than the VM storage and all of that sort of stuff, you're using Docker Hub for your container registry, and it's all really cheap. I think the VM's the most expensive part. I think that was like 16 quid a month or something to have the VM sitting there. And I've just stopped that recently, but it's pretty cheap, and there's lots of moving parts, and you need something called Watchtower or an equivalent. I think you can do it with Kubernetes if you get really, really complicated. But you have a Docker image called Watchtower, and that's looking at images in Docker Hub to see if there's an update. So it's a very similar process. It's just rolling your own. But you're going to need something like that. The problem with any of these systems is that you need to build a lot of resilience into that whole pipeline, because if you deploy at scale and you've got 1,000 or 10,000 devices and you brick them all, somebody's going to be knocking at your door, and they're not going to be happy because they can't boil the kettle, yeah? Or have the right temperature tea or coffee, yeah?
The null is no longer the $1 million mistake. Not sending the correct Docker image up and wiping out your IoT fleet is now the $1 million mistake.
Yeah, it really would. People would be annoyed.
Excellent. Okay. This episode of the .NET Core podcast is sponsored by configcat.com. ConfigCat is a feature flag service. It has a central dashboard where you toggle your flags visually, hide or expose features in your application without redeploying code, set targeting rules to allow you to control who has access to new features, easily use flags in your code with ConfigCat libraries for .NET and 9 other platforms. Get built out faster, test in production, and do easy rollbacks. Release new features with less risk and release more often. With ConfigCat's simple API and clear documentation, you'll have your initial proof of concept up and running in minutes. Also, train new team members in minutes and don't pay extra for the team size. With the simple UI, even product managers can use it effectively. You could try it out with their free forever plan, or get 50% off of a paid plan with the code NETCORESHOW. That's NETCORESHOW. Release features faster, with less risk, with ConfigCat. Check them out today at configcat.com. So there's loads of those moving parts. So let's take the Raspberry Pi out of the equation, right? Let's say you're using Arduino or some other device. Is it still as, I don't want to say complicated, and I don't really want to replace that with complex because they're kind of the same word, but is there still as many moving parts in wanting to deploy something to, say, Arduino or any of the formats, the Adafruits, those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, you're talking about a different beast entirely at that point. The closest you get to that is something called the MX Chip Dev Board, actually, which is another Microsoft piece of kit, and that's Arduino based. It looks very similar to a microbit, that same sort of form factor, and it's got that same edge connector idea, but it's got an OLED on it, and but that can hook itself straight up to IoT Hub, and you can manage that in a very similar way. So you can do your deployments through IoT Hub. But just blanket, if you say Arduino, then you're talking very low level stuff. And yeah, you're probably going to have to roll your own at that point. But there's been a recent announcement at Build, or rather something went GA, something called RTOS, Azure RTOS. and they've created a whole operating system for really low-powered devices. And I think unless you're using the GUI elements, then it goes all the way down to 2K. So it's a whole operating system that running just in 2K of memory. So I mean that, when you say 2K to somebody, you can't even write a game in 2K anymore. So
you can kind of, I don't know whether you know, but there was the guy, oh dear, what was his name? Mikhail Strahovski, who took C#.NET Snake and reduced it to 8K, but he had to put like days of work into it, right? And he had to roll his own compiler and mess around with his own. He had to write his own interfaces for the actual .NET stack and say, don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. Just implement empty interface versions of them. And so it's possible, but just you're not going to do it for a commercial product.
No, like the guy who managed to, because .NET Core's cross-plat, isn't it? So why don't we compile some of this stuff to run on Windows 3.11? Mm-hmm. I think they even managed to get it to run in DOS or something, didn't they? Somehow.
Yeah, that's the same guy. It's the same guy.
Oh, is it? Oh, there you go then. Yeah.
He's part of the Core RT team. And he was telling me that, it's just, I'm playing around with it to see what we can do with it. And then showing off because, look, you can write your apps for Windows 3.1. Because why not?
Yeah, exactly, because I can. When's he going to do the Commodore 64 version? Is he going to do that?
Now, that's an interesting question. That would be interesting. Excellent.
Mac, Linux. Linux, Windows, C64.
That would actually be an amazing thing if they could pull that off.
Sounds like something Hanson would do.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Well, I'll have to do it once we finish this recording. Tweet them both and say, look, when's the C64 .NET Core SDK coming out?
I can't wait. Sorry, it's got to be the 128. You can't do it in the 64.
Exactly right. Excellent. So one of the things that I'd like to ask is, have you seen Clifford Aegis' Handy project?
We had him at Knots IoT. It was, I think, awesome. It was the last speaker we had before we had lockdown, and that was one of the best meetups we've ever had. We had Clifford and Tomasz Botaski. I'm terrible at pronouncing his name, so apologies, Tomasz, if I've pronounced that incorrectly. So Tomasz was talking about IoT hubs and stuff, which are close to my heart. I love that stuff. And Clifford was talking about his Handy, which is like a Xamarin controlled. I think it's an Arduino that he's got in there. Forget actually. It's an Arduino. So he's been struggling with it recently. I think it got broken, didn't it?
I think when I talked to him about it, he'd swapped the Arduino for an Adafruit. And then, because this was back in January when I talked to him, he said in March, I'm going to be trying to install a Meadow, because their Bluetooth stack wasn't quite right. And he's like, I have to be able to control it from the phone, you know?
And we can write in C# if it's a Meadow as well, I think.
Exactly, right. Exactly.
Labs thing. It's dead cool. I need to get myself one of those because, it really does look cool. In fact, they have a boot camp. I think it's going on right this very minute that I'm not attending because I'm talking to you. But the other reason I'm not attending is because I don't have one. And so a lot of watching people do IoT isn't as fun. Clifford is awesome, and he's just a brand new MVP as well, and for good reason. He is mega cool. He's going to go a long way, and plus he's a pilot, so how much more cool would he need to be? It's just not fair.
You see, I was sat there talking to him, and I'm like, so you've made this project in your own time, you've made it with your own money, and you're giving it away, which is wonderful. But you're not even a developer by trade. No. What are you doing to us all?
I know. He is the guy that wins when he does no work, but obviously he does a shed load of work. And he's the nicest guy that you'll ever meet as well. He's just got everything. Mm-hmm. I think most recently I saw him down at NDC London, and we had a catch-up down there too. And then he came up to Knots IoT and spoke there, and everybody was in awe. And there was a really cool coincidence at the same time, actually. There's one of the most popular people in the Nottingham community, Rizwana, and she runs PF Knots, a project function thing, which is for disadvantaged and people to get into tech, and that's a fantastic thing. But her sister, who I think lives in Germany, was over, and she was doing a uni project on a hand. She wanted to create a hand, and she emailed me a couple of days, or tweeted me, I forget, a couple of days before Not So OT, and I said, you just need to come because it's going to be able to answer all your questions. So she came to that, and then Riz and her came round, and I wired up because she'd bought, I think she did it with the Raspberry Pi Zero perhaps, but she bought the header and didn't realise you needed to solder the header in and stuff. So I soldered all of the stuff together, and I think it all worked, thankfully, although my soldering arm was having a bad day that day. But it worked still. So yeah, it's so much fun. And all of the different stuff that Clifford was able to talk about in that, just 3D printing on its own, all of that stuff was cool. And then all the little tendony type things to be able to pull the hand and make, and then the Xamarin inside and the different sort of functions that he could make it do. And he was even able to play Xbox with it. And it's just, incredible stuff.
Fascinating stuff. I do remember, I'll have to catch up with him, but I do remember when I talked to him at NDC London, he said, I need someone to help me with machine learning. So hopefully by the time this goes out, he's already found someone to help him. But I was thinking, Azure Cognitive Services, that's kind of machine learning, right?
Yeah, to a degree. You can tell it whether the hand is happy or not, yeah?
Oh, yeah, right. If anyone sets off the singularity, it'll be him.
It's true. I like it.
Excellent. Oh dear. Okay, so we've laughed and joked a lot about IoT, but I've got to. So how do I get started with? Let's say I don't have any boards, but I want to write an app and I want to run it on a simulator. Is there a simulator that I can get? Is there? What can I do? I have this itch to do the IoT, but my deliveries aren't going to come in for 3 days. What do I just wait 3 days? Is there what can I do? Is there a VM I can run, a simulator? What's the plan?
Yeah, you don't even bother ordering anything to begin with, is what I tell people, and go straight for the simulator. Actually, I mean, there's so many good ones. It really just depends on. I guess it depends on your level. If you're a really sort of proficient, experienced programmer, and you're happy with either Node or C even, then there's a couple of simulators out there. I mentioned the MX chip device, and if hooking up to something like Azure is really what you want to get to work, and sort of the hardware is almost second fiddle to the fact that you want to connect up to Azure, then this is really good. You go in there, it's all in C. I'm not an expert in C at all, but all the code's there. So you hit this MX chip simulator up there, and this is an open source GitHub project that Microsoft have made. And if you've got show notes, then we can put the links to all of these in there. But all you need to do is click a button, and it'll run you through provisioning all of the services in Azure. So you don't even need to worry about how to do that. It will do that part for you. And it'll take a connection string from the IoT hub that you're connected to, and it'll put it in a box, and you run it. And there's a little simulated MX chip device with its OLED on the right-hand side and a couple of buttons. And it tells you to hit a button, and then you can shake the device, and then it'll send a message up to IoT hub. And you can download something called the IoT Explorer or an IoT Twin SDK. And there's a little application you can run there. Again, it's open source, and you can paste a different connection string, a slightly different connection string in there for the hub rather than the device. And you can monitor those messages. So you can get that comms, but you don't have to have a device for that. So if Azure's your way to go, then that's fantastic. There is a Raspberry Pi flavor of that, and that's all in Node. And that's, again, another open source Microsoft project. So a Raspberry Pi Azure simulator. And you just need to create the IoT hub, and there's some instructions, a nice, useful help file in there that you can go read and guide yourself through that. Grab the connection string, paste it into the Node.js and hit run, and do that same thing, and it just works. And there's like a fake temperature sensor and a little fake LED, and you can see the LED flashing, and it sends some simulated temperature, humidity, and stuff up to IoT Hub. And you can then, the good thing is, once you've got it going into IoT Hub, then if Azure's the goal, then you don't need the device. It's all the data is actually going there, and you can play with time series insights or analytics or out to a logic app or anything that you really want to do at that point. But if the hardware's what you want to do, if you're like a young adult, then I always point them at the MakeCode website for the microbit, because again, that's a simulated microbit, and you hit that up and you get a microbit on the left hand side, and you get a Blockly based programming paradigm on there, so you can drag blocks to make your code rather than having to type it. But it's reasonably powerful. Even you can go into the advanced section, and there's like a pins area, and you can drag a servo on there, and a servo will appear underneath the microbit, and you can make a fake servo move, and the wire colors and everything all line up with a real servo you buy. And so you can buy a microbit, buy a servo, and some crop clips, and hook them up to the same wires that you can see on the screen, and download the code from MakeCode and just copy it onto the microbit, and it will just work. It's a really cool way of just getting started with stuff. But then my favorite that I like to leave till last, but in my talk that I give, it comes that halfway in between, because you land Azure on somebody that they don't know anything about IoT, and they get a little bit bamboozled by that. But there's something called Tinkercad, and it's made by Autodesk, the people that make AutoCAD. Mm-hmm. And it's a circuit playground, and you can drag resistors and LEDs and batteries and 74 LS chips on there and make whole circuits. But you can drag an Arduino Uno on there as well. And when you do that and you hook up your components, there's a little code button that appears. You hit the code button and you can program the simulated Arduino in a block-based paradigm in there too. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to program an Arduino, but it's in C. And if you're just starting out in programming, C isn't where you want to start. Please don't start. In fact, people say you should start with JavaScript. Don't start with JavaScript either. Oh, it's a hard place to start. Actually, if JavaScript's that easy to start, it's just when you don't want to do anything that's hello world in JavaScript. That's complicated. But yeah, you drag the blocks in, and you can make your Arduino do stuff. But when you're a little bit more proficient, you can switch that off and go for the C version of it. But even better than that, you can even put breakpoints in your code. And you can stop and step through your code and inspect variables and stuff, and that's massively powerful. So I mean, you can drag all sorts of stuff on their servos again, like we did with the microbit on MakeCode. But you can drag like motors on there and make like faux robots if you like. And I made a full like four motor robot in Tinkercad before I made it for real, just to get the software working properly and understand how the circuit was going to work. It looked horrible, but it did work. And yeah, that's by far and away my favorite demo to show people, because nobody knows about it. No one knows about Tinkercad. There's a similar one by Microsoft for a bunch of different devices, but based on MakeCode. And what's that called? I can't remember what it's called now. Maker.makecode.com. And you can select from a whole heap of different Arduino-based devices on there, and you choose whatever your platform is, and it brings you up something that looks almost exactly the same as MakeCode, because it's based on the same underlying design. But instead of a microbit, then you get, say, an Arduino Zero, and you can drag pins on there and tell it to turn a pin on and off, and it will know that you want to turn an LED on and off, and it will create you a little simulated breadboard with an LED on it and a resistor, and it'll connect it up to the pins you tell it to, and then you can just write your code by dragging blocks on there, and it'll simulate an LED turning on and off. And it's incredible, actually, what you can do without buying a single piece of hardware. And people need to know more about that, because so many people are a bit scared or put off by the number of options. There's so many options. And I mean, there's enough options in simulation, but you don't want to make the wrong choice and go and buy an expensive board, 20, 30, 40 quid's worth of stuff, or 70, 80 quid's worth if you're talking Raspberry Pi, and not really know if it's for you or not. So yeah, the coolest one actually is there's an AstroPi simulator. Have you heard of AstroPi?
I haven't, no.
No. So on the space station right now, there's 2 Raspberry Pis. Tim Peake took them up there when he went up there, and they're Raspberry Pis in a ruggedized case with a hat on board that's a little bit like a microbit with temperature, humidity, and a gyroscope and magnetometer and a display and stuff like that. And kids and young adults can write experiments down here on Earth, and they get sent up to the space station and run, and they get the results back. And it's absolutely it's so cool. And they have a hack every year, and I think we've just had ours just in January. And you can write, like even 5-year-olds can write stuff that will go up there and just say hello to the astronauts, and you get a picture of it running and a certificate to say that it's run. And younger adults then get to run proper experiments, and there's like a lottery system as to which one gets chosen. But that's all Raspberry Pi, and you need the Sense hat that you plug into it, and possibly a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor and an SD card and power supply and a case, and all of those things add up to a lot of money. But there's a simulator for that written in Trinket, and it simulates the whole Sense hat part of the Raspberry Pi, and so you can write the Python code right there in Trinket, and then run it, and it will show you the results directly on the screen there, and then you can just copy and paste that code onto a real Raspberry Pi with a Sense hat and run it, and it will just run. So, I mean, to tell anybody that their code's going to run in space, it's just cool. Never mind a child whose head's going to explode.
Right, one of my little ones is just gotten really hardcore into science, and he's like, I've got to do science. When I'm a grown up, I'm going to do science. Right, he doesn't know what kind of science, but he's going to do science. So if I can set that up for him, I've got a couple of Raspberry Pis laying around the house. Get him to write some code and get it running in space. That'd be amazing, right?
I think Moon Hack is coming up, where they ask you to make moon-related projects. And I taught my eldest how to do a Scratch program where we had the Phoenix lander was coming in, and it was too many boulders, and we had to carry on, and it was running out of fuel, and we simulated all of that. And she, like, I told her what to do for a lot of it, but she had the ideas, and then she wanted an alien who would be scary and stuff at the end of it. Obviously, there's got to be aliens. But it's really accessible. Stuff like Scratch, which I know it's not really IoT, but it's been popularized by Raspberry Pi. That sort of stuff, that block-based programming language is awesome. And in fact, that block-based programming paradigm is starting to take off again now. And a lot of people frown at the fact that it's simplified, but stuff like Power Apps, Logic Apps, it's all block-based programming. And I think that we'll not get parity ever, obviously, but there will be a point where a lot of what we're going to do, I mean, we laughed earlier about the fact that we're just putting blocks together, but why? You don't need to reinvent the wheel what does Node do? We download one package, you get 600. It's the same sort of idea. We're just plugging blocks together.
Exactly. And the people who say that this isn't real programming, that isn't real programming, I laughed earlier on about my friend James and I talk about C# isn't real programming because but we talk about that because, you're not writing the low-level stack. You're not writing the TCP IP code and all that kind of stuff. But even if you're working in C and C++, you're still not doing that anyway. You pull that code in. But the people who say that this isn't real programming, this is, or what I do is real programming, what you do isn't. All they're doing is gatekeeping, right? They're telling people who want to know how to do it that they can't do it because, you're not as good as me. And I'm like, shut up, check this thing out. Come and have a look at this. It's amazing.
Yeah, I find people like that really frustrating. And I'm a STEM ambassador as well. And so, I'm kind of driven by the fact that I've got 2 young kids to do that. And it puts everyone off, but it puts people that believe that off more. And they only need to hear that once from somebody that is respected. And I'm hoping that, Scott Hanselman is doing an absolutely fantastic job of dispelling all of those myths. And at Build, he had an interview with a young girl. I can't remember what her name was. She was fantastic, actually. She'd entered a space competition with a bunch of friends, and they were making a space capsule radiation monitoring system. And they were doing that in MakeCode, and Scott was interacting with her, and he was awesome. The way that whole interview went down was fantastic, and he was talking about the block-based programming paradigm in that and how people frown on it. And it was like, yes, exactly what Scott was saying, exactly just that. Please,
it's just what we do. I think on a day-to-day basis is hard enough anyway. We've got to take this vague set of what I want the app to do and make something that is never going to reach that, because what they want the app to do isn't what they actually want the app to do. So that bit's difficult in itself, right? So, and then writing the code, yeah, all right, maybe you've got decades of experience, but it's still going to be, there's going to be parts that you don't quite get, that's going to be difficult to do. You're going to hit some roadblocks, so it's going to be hard anyway. Telling people when they start, stop it because you're not doing it properly, is no. Let them get that experience, right? I still remember when I was a kid, we had an Amstrad CPC 464, right?
Was it green screened? Tell me it had a green screen.
Green screen, tape deck, big mechanical keys. That's it. Yeah. And, I sat there with this magazine. We had a whole stack of magazines, right? They all had these basic listings. And I was like, yep, copy this into here and run that. And, I wasn't a good typist and I got a lot of stuff wrong. And I struggled for hours and hours and hours. But then when I hit that button and it animated a stick figure walking across the screen, it was the greatest feeling ever. Look at what I've just done. None of you can do that. And if you could do that with block-based, if you can do that by typing in arcane commands, if you could do that in Python, in C, in C#, in JavaScript, whatever it is you're doing, do it because you'll feel that elation, right?
You're definitely right. Yeah, I mean, that's how I started. So I had a Spectrum. So my cousin had a 464, funnily enough. I think he had Joe Blade, and that game was awesome. But yeah, so I had the same thing. So Your Sinclair or whatever the magazine was with the really bad listing that never worked. But funnily enough, when I was 14, I had something called a Sam Coupe, which is like a souped up Super Spectrum, and I created an advert for Lemmings for a disc magazine called Fred back then. And recently I managed to get another Sam Coupe and some discs, and I found that program that I created when I was 14 on that disc. So I put that on YouTube. But yeah, 14, that's like, I don't know, 26 years ago, something like that, 28 years ago, something along those lines. But I wish I had the actual code. That would be fantastic, because I think Colin, the guy that ran the magazine, because it was all in BASIC what I made and really hacky, I think he recoded it into like this half a K bloody all singing, all dancing version of what I'd done in half a minute. So, it's gutted at the time, but it was awesome to see my work on there. And I've done a few things, but you're right. And I kind of want to instill that in my daughter. And I was really proud one day when, after we'd been doing all this Scratch work, and she had a project to do, a science project. She did it in Scratch. We worked on it together, and she went into school and she couldn't get it to work. And she was gutted, but she said, "But don't worry, Daddy, because I just showed them how to make it." So she essentially ran a class on how to use Scratch and make this program.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. And now we have every night at 6:15, my father-in-law reads a story to all of his grandkids. It's really cute. And he disappears off after he's read the story, and all the grandkids sit and talk to each other. And I've caught Isla a few times on Scratch showing her cousins how to do stuff, and they do it as well. So they're making these janky little programs and stuff, but she's really excited about it. And yeah, I'm chuffed at stuff like that. But I mean, IoT is one of the reasons why I like IoT is because of this, because it's great it's being caught in Scratch, but when you show them something real and robots, kids love robots or anything that moves, and to show them how easy it is. Certainly the microbit's dead good for that, and there's loads of little robots that you can go and buy off the shelf and plug a microbit into, and the code's just drag and drop, and copy it onto microbit, and off it goes, and you got a robot, and they love that. The physical STEM stuff is fantastic for that, so I love that.
Yeah. I still remember using. Did you have one of these, the turtle robots at school? You had to forward 10, turn left by 45 degrees.
Yeah. BBC that was. I've got a BBC. I bought a BBC recently. Exactly that. Well, it's like Scratch. Scratch is almost that exact same thing. Have you seen the guy that's hooked an Arduino up to a real BBC, and you can tweet it? You tweet the Twitter account. I can't remember what it's called, but you tweet it, your program. It runs it on a real BBC.
Sends you the video of the output, right?
Yeah. And how cool is that?
That is cool. Amazing. Cool. Okay, so we talked about the simulators. We talked about how you don't have to actually buy anything. So then, I guess the difficult thing is okay, I have an idea. I've got my little one. We're going to build a robot. We don't know what we're going to use yet, but we don't know what language we're going to use. Are all of the devices language agnostic? Or we talked about Arduino requires C, right? And then like the microbit requires, I think you said C as well, but you can use Scratch, and the Maker stuff uses the visual paradigm. There's so many different languages. How do you settle on one device, one language, and build your app?
Yeah, well, I mean, Arduino, funnily enough, yes, C mainly, but there's Circuit Python. So you could do Python for Arduino as well. And Python's a lot more accessible than C. Well, anything is a lot more accessible than C, actually. Russian, I think, is a lot more accessible than C. But the good thing, again, about something like Tinkercad or that MakeCode, in fact, the MakeCode equivalent, you write in JavaScript, and then you download a pre-built file, and you just copy it on to an Arduino Zero. It works a little bit like a microbit in that stage. I mean, you go to a Raspberry Pi and you can do it in whatever you want. It really just up to you. That microbit you're doing in either blocks or JavaScript again, because it's the same underlying system. But again, all of those things, you just download the code and you copy it onto your device, and perhaps you don't even need to see the JavaScript. The more complicated you get, I mean, if you want to do anything at all that's going to connect out to something like Azure, then you're going to need C or C# or Node or Python, any of those sorts of languages. And Microsoft, and I mean the AWS equivalent as well, obviously, they'll give you SDKs for all of that. I mean, oh, crikey, trying to do any of that like in C, though. Oh, sorry, C programmers, but C is hard.
And this is from the guy who used to do assembler.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, assembler's hard. But I suppose what you used to. I did do C at that same company, actually, but I spent a lot of time on forums asking people what the heck, and people giving me answers, and I copy and paste that in, and that worked. I've got no idea why. I don't know what it is. C's hard, pointers and all of that. Oh, geez. Too many ands. I don't like it. But I mean, again, you just don't have to get too involved with that. I mean, that Tinkercad, it will download the code for you as C, so it'll convert your blocks into C, which is dead good. So if you wanted to learn C, or at least the Arduino flavor of C, then that's a really good way to try and move people. And that's kind of what happens. So with something like MakeCode, you can start with the blocks and then you can switch to JavaScript. So that's a really good way of teaching JavaScript. And there's an equivalent for making little arcade games as well, which I think Scott Hanselman demoed. So that's really cool. But then, Raspberry Pi, if you want to do anything Azurely, then you're going to be on. I mean, I spend a lot of time in Node, but obviously we're on the .NET Core podcast, so you can quite happily run .NET Core on there. I've made a single line install script to be able to install .NET Core on a Raspberry Pi now. So before it was rather difficult. There's quite a lot of steps. And so, you said I write a lot of posts, and that's part of that series of posts is how to do that install process. And I just got bored of telling people it's too hard, because as we discussed earlier, you don't want to tell people stuff's hard because they're just not going to do it. So if it's one single line to install it, then I'll do that, then don't have to worry about it.
It's all about reducing that barrier to entry, isn't it?
Precisely.
I argue that although we talked about JavaScript isn't maybe not a brilliant language to start with, but when you get your computer, whether it's a laptop, a desktop, whatever, it has everything you need to be able to do JavaScript. You've got a text editor, you've got a web browser, done, right? Your barrier to entry is so low. C#, .NET, you've got to install the tools, but once you've done that, at university, right? I studied at the University of Hull under Rob Miles. Now, he's a very big DDD and IoT person, but all of his lectures were done with Notepad and the C# command line compiler. So he'd just do Notepad and then the name of the file, and the Notepad would come up, and then he'd do CSE, the name of the file, and then it would compile, right? Because you don't need these fancy tools. But that's a little bit more complex. But reducing that barrier to entry, if your entryway into development is, all right, I grab a couple of boxes and I drag them in and I draw lines between them, fantastic. If you're brave enough to look behind that and see what it's doing, even better. If not, don't worry about it. We'll move on to something else. I love it.
Yep. I think Microsoft have recognised that as well with the push that they're making to make as many bits of that learning journey free. And certainly, I mean, just MS Learn all on its own, and now MS Learn TV that's just been launched is a great way of starting that off. And then things like VS Community Edition and GitHub's now free, and bringing Xamarin in and making that free. And yeah, they know what they're doing, because certainly if you can grab students early enough and make universities use it because it's also free, they'll go into a job where they already know that stuff. And if that company isn't using it, then they'll go, I know how to do this. And then suddenly, 5 years down the line, you're a gold partner at that company and they're spending a lot of money. So, I mean, they're doing it for a good reason, but they're also altruistic at the same time. It's fantastic. Removing barriers is the forefront of what I want to do, really. It's great.
So what about everything else? And so what's the, let's say, not everything else, because that could take years. Let's say someone wants to reach out to you and say, hey, Pete, I've got this great idea. Can I talk to you about it? Can we figure out something about one of your meetups, or talk about how we can, you said you're a STEM ambassador, so how can I talk to you about that? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you to sort of further this conversation? Yeah,
Twitter's definitely the best way. So I'm at Pete_codes on Twitter. Just send me a message on there and start the conversation that way. Email, I think I'm email bankrupt on several different email accounts. So yeah, I tend to miss emails, but Twitter's definitely the best way. And I'm more than happy. I'm just a massive geek. So I love hearing about what people's projects are. And the number of times that people come to my talks and then they'll go home and they'll send me a tweet to say, oh, I bought all of this stuff now and I'm getting it wired up, and please, can you just help me with X, Y, Z? And yeah, I'm trying to work actually, but I'll definitely help you because that looks really cool. I saw somebody making in this world of COVID, they were using microbits, and you can look at the radio power between two different microbits to look at proximity, and so they were going to make a warning system between two microbits to tell you if you got to, like the government tracing app, but microbit version. And that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, right. And they're not that expensive, so you could just make a whole bunch of them and just give them out to people, right? You could wear them like Iron Man's little chest thing, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, the government gave $1 million out to year 7 and 8 or something, or years 6 and 7 or whichever. So, yeah, do it again.
Yeah, right.
COVID bit.
Yeah, COVID bit. I like it. Excellent. No, I like that. Yeah. Ah, geez. This has genuinely been an amazing conversation. I really, really love this conversation. So, yeah, we talked about how people can get in contact with you. So what were those meetups again? And we'll put the links in the show notes, but just so that people can sort of rehear them, because obviously people are maybe driving or something. I don't want to reach in over to grab a pen whilst they're driving, No,
that'd just be very, very dangerous. Yes. And please don't ring us if you're in a ditch. We shouldn't be the first person you ring.
I can't fix cars, okay?
Or body parts, actually.
Yeah, okay.
So Knots IoT, .NET Knots, Knots Dev Workshop, and Lati are the four main ones. I'm also, I know I don't know, it's really bad, but I'm also part of the Agile Engineering podcast. There's four of us five of us that are doing that. Four of us. And in fact, Liam Gulliver, one of the guys who runs that, he also runs DevOps Knots, and he's got Gene Kim at the end of this month.
Oh, wow.
And so he'll love me for mentioning that. Depends on when this goes out. It might be too late.
Well, I could take a small snippet and push that out. That's not a problem. But
yeah, definitely. So, awesome. Yeah, that'll be good. But that'll be recorded anyway, so you'll be able to watch the recording after this recording.
Of course, yeah. Excellent. Oh my goodness! Yeah, I've had a ton of fun talking with you today, Pete, and we'll have to catch up again when this whole situation is over. I keep referring to it in other guises as the nonsense, but not because of any political reason, just because let's make fun of it and it's easier to deal with. So once all this nonsense is over, let's figure out a way to meet up. I owe you a beer or something.
I don't mind. Yeah, any time that involves beer, then I'm going to be there anyway, which is half the reason to go to all of the DDDs that I always see you at.
Exactly.
And, that .NET Core guy.
That's it. Awesome. Well, like I said, thank you ever so much. And I hope whatever it is you do with the rest of your Friday evening, you have a wonderful time doing it.
Beer.
Oh, well, okay, fair enough.
I'll serve it myself. I'm not going to wait for the firmware update to happen on the machine.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. That was my interview with Pete Gallagher about IoT and .NET Core. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for some more .NET Core goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks. .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.